but Jesus as the center. I don't mean just in a phrase or a good hook in a song lyric, but truly as the center. Last week we talked about simple and pure devotion to Jesus and sort of how Paul's reflection in 2 Corinthians, he wasn't so concerned in 2 Corinthians about moral drifting. He was concerned about the mind, and we just kind of get confused, and we get layers and layers of stuff, and we're just kind of thinking over and over, and this and that, and there's something helpful in the pursuit of the exploration within the mind, and our faith is not opposed to intellectualism or academics, but this sense that sometimes we can go so far down these rabbit holes, we just lose Jesus entirely, and we lose the simplicity of who he is. And today, just again, this thing of Jesus being the center. And Alyssa, I wanted to tell you, your dog is welcome here. All creation. We led a community in LA for several years in Hollywood, and so sometimes we had more dogs in the building than humans. So we totally get the dog thing. So anyway, just so you know, your dog is not barred from the space. All creation will worship the Lord. So let's read this text together. Do you read this with me? The Son. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. I've kind of found myself landing in this space of reflection, meditation, prayer, study around this text. Because there's a lot of chatter going on, at least in my spaces. There's a lot of voices out there decrying, watch out or you'll be on the wrong side of history. So it could be a group, get phone calls, emails. Don't you know God's speaking this new thing to the church or restoring something? And if you don't get on this bandwagon, Canada may plunge into 5 years of darkness, or there could be something, the church won't come online. Revival can't happen, renewal can't happen, and it's like, I don't want to be on the wrong side of this thing. We've been exploring and discussing, I think in a healthy, transparent way, sexuality. Some that are leaning into an understanding, which we have space for, just not on the same page, that there's something happening in the arc of the teachings of Jesus that is landing at this mark in 2020 and the 2000s, where there's a shift of understanding around marriage, various things like that. It's like, don't get on the wrong side of history. I've got opinions coming at me from, kind of the internet. You've got things that you read, and this sense of incredible pressure. And these are healthy, helpful things to think about. We never want to create a space where we cannot dialogue. We want to have a large enough bandwidth where we can even be in disagreement and walk together on this journey of faith. It's not about some are right and some are wrong. It's about what are we leaning into. But this is a terrifying, at least for me, it keeps me awake at night sometimes. I've had this phrase running through my head. I'm like, Lord, I don't want to be on the wrong side of history. The Urban Dictionary describes it like this. It's idiomatic. It's usually around politics. It's a derogatory statement. It's meant to provoke, to make you kind of feel bad about where you are. And I don't even mean that in a negative sense. Having policies or practices that are perceived as not progressive or enlightened. Behaving in a manner that reflects out-of-date or disapproved opinions. Another layer of meaning of being on the wrong side of history is that you are behind the times. You're out of date. You're out of touch. I don't know about you, it creates in me this phenomenal FOMO. The fear of missing out. What if I'm in the wrong church? What if I've aligned with the wrong group of people? What if I'm listening to the wrong teacher? What if I didn't get the right book? What if I didn't go to the right conference? What if I did? And it happens right across the spectrum of faith, doesn't it? You don't have to be conservative or charismatic. You don't have to be fundamental or progressive to feel this angst. Now, where the Holy Spirit might be stirring us and causing us to look at our lives and see where we maybe are somewhat out of line or there's things that we need to recalibrate, that's a healthy process. That's called repentance. Think again. Metanoia. You've been thinking a certain way. There's probably a different way to think. We can never be afraid to lean into that space or we will lose what we were describing earlier as spiritual formation, won't we? We'll just kind of be stuck. And Groundhog Day, Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, never transform, never change, never grow. But this FOMO, this anxiety that an exciting or interesting event may currently be happening elsewhere is crippling to the soul. It's hard to breathe in that space, isn't it? Really hard to breathe. And it becomes incredibly difficult to truly listen to each other when we are in that level of internal angst. It's interesting that, again, the Urban Dictionary tells us that FOMO is often aroused by posts seen on a social media website. These voices can be just as loud within the faith community as anywhere else in society. What should our posture be? While acknowledging that there is growth, insight, and learning that impacts the human story and the human condition, hopefully we know more about ourselves through science, through listening, through sociology, through various and sundry explorations of academia and just lost the word, the disciplines. Hopefully we're learning. Hopefully we are more aware. There's things that I would never do today that I maybe would have even done 20 years ago. I'm not going to throw my mother under the bus, and she wouldn't mind me sharing this, but we had this horrific kind of moment at Christmas, and I won't tell you what she said, but she said something that was like, made me think you're on the wrong side of history. We change, we grow, we learn, we stretch. This is part of the normal human story, the human condition. But may we just propose today, just for thought, that being on the wrong side of history is somewhat incompatible with the Christian worldview. Dear friend of mine, Dr. Caleb Maskell, did his PhD work at Princeton. Cornel West was his advisor. So I actually got to interact with Cornel West. I never met him face to face, but I did have FaceTime exchange with Cornel. I don't know if you're familiar with Cornel West, civil activist in the United States, marched with Martin Luther King. You gotta check out Cornel. Now he probably shows up on late night talk shows that some of you wouldn't watch and others of you watch religiously every night. So I'm not going to tell you which end of the spectrum he's on. But he's a brilliant thinker, an amazing theologian and philosopher. So my friend Caleb is really shaped by some of his thinking. But I called him a couple weeks ago. I said, dude, I'm actually stressing out over this. He's PhD in history. It doesn't make him an expert or anything, but he studied a little more than I have. I trust his insights. He said this, David, just relax. Jesus is the center of history. The only way to experience history as a Christian is to follow him. Any other framework is rooted in a notion of progress or conservation that is pinned to a different hope. It puts man at the center of the story and our progression and our thought and our development. Now, we need to be growing and flourishing. We're not opposed to that, but it's what is the context of our flourishing? Does that kind of make sense? To aim for either side of history is literal ideological idolatry. It's a little bit what we talked about last week. I'm afraid that somehow in your mind, you're being led astray from just simplicity of devotion to Jesus, which, as we painfully talked about last week, doesn't mean dumbed down. It doesn't mean non-intellectual. It doesn't mean unstudied or uneducated. But you could end up in ideological idolatry. If there are differences between followers of Jesus at particular historic crossroads, then we just take different roads as we follow him. All we can land on is follow me as I follow Jesus. And if you can't follow me, if we're in that sort of a relationship together as I'm following Jesus, by all means, follow Jesus. And his name is not the Vineyard. His name is not John Wimber. His name is not Anita Roos. His name is not the Baptist. His name is not Alliance. His name is Jesus. And it's the name above every name. And it's at his name that we all bow. And we can just walk in simplicity of obedience and choose to bless and not curse. To lay down our stones and not hurl them at one another as we just faithfully try to walk out our faith. The language of the right side of history, Maskell says, is utterly pejorative. And I found that in my own experience. It's created angst in me. It's made me angry and things I shouldn't even, that normally don't even bother me. It's made me irritated with people. I go, Jesus, what's happening? Obviously, I need some transformation and some wholeness inside of me. But Lord, maybe I'm standing in the wrong place. And even in my knowledge that I'll never get all the answers right, I'm still asking the wrong questions. Caleb says it's unchristian. This is his opinion. Honestly, theories of linear progress, you can Google that. I can't unpack all that for you. I know you're not in a university philosophy course here, but theories of linear progress are no more Christian than Freemasonry. If you don't know what linear progress is, you might want to look it up. Because we are all impacted by it. He is before all things. And in him, all things hold together. This word all, pas, each, every, any and every kind of, fully. Christ is the center. Christ is the center. Christ is at the center. Christ is the center. Christ is the center of creation, the center of his people, the center of history. Christ is the center of the history of humanity and also the center of the history of every individual. To him we can bring the joys and the hopes, the sorrows and troubles which are part of our lives. When Jesus is the center, light shines. Even amid the darkest times of our lives, he gives us hope as he does to the good thief that hung beside him on the cross. All others treat Jesus with disdain. If you're the Christ, the Messiah King, save yourself from coming down off the cross. Prove yourself, Jesus. Who do you think you are? The thief who went astray in his life, but now repents, clings to the crucified Jesus and begs him, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus promises him, today you'll be with me in paradise, in his kingdom. Jesus speaks only a word of forgiveness, not of condemnation. Whenever anyone finds the courage to ask for this forgiveness, the Lord does not let such a petition go unheard. Today, we can all think of our own history, our own journey. Each of us has his or her own history. We think of our mistakes, our sins, our good times, and our bleak times. We would do well to think about our history, to look at Jesus, and to keep telling him sincerely and quietly, remember me, Lord, now that you're in your kingdom. Jesus, remember me. Because I want to be good. I just don't have the strength. I'm a sinner. I am a sinner. But remember me, Jesus. You can remember me because you are at the center. You are truly in your kingdom. How beautiful this is. Let us all do this today, each one of us in his or her own heart, again and again. Remember me, Lord, you who are at the center. You who are in your kingdom. Pope Francis delivered these words on November 24th, 2013 in Rome. I couldn't say it any better. I had to read it. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. In him. That which holds all things together is not a force, not a disembodied cosmic essence, nor the universe in and of itself. Jesus is not only the one through whom all things come to be, but also the one by whom they continue to exist. He sustains, he makes all things new. It is his kingdom come and coming. Many interpreters have noted striking similarities between the terminology and thought forms in Colossians 1:15-20. It's actually a hymn. It's actually a poem. It should be unpacked in an entirely different way. Some commentators have brilliantly laid it out in more of a poetic, chiasmic sort of form that Paul would have originally written it in. But it's anchored, the concept of the center of the universe, the world that Jesus stepped on. The Jewish side, they saw wisdom, sort of this mystical sphere in some of the mystical teachings and mystics among the Jewish people, that there was this force that kind of was at the center of all things and kind of held it together. Wisdom theology has wisdom as the image of God and the creator of the world. The Greek philosophers thought of the world, the cosmos, remember this, the cosmos, the logos. John was not the first one to use the logos. The word is Christ. He was revolutionary because that was common teaching of the day, that there was this thing called the logos, the word, a force, not even a being, the universe. The universe was the logos. These aren't new teachings. They've been around way longer than 2,000 years. Jesus stepped into this space and had the audacity to say, it's me in the flesh. The word has become flesh. The logos is not just a mystical force. It's me with my hands stretched out and my heart open wide, with nails driven through my hand and my feet, and a spear thrust through my side, and thorns jammed down on my head. I have come, Emmanuel, God with you. Paul turns from the mysticism of the Jews, and he turns from the paganism of Roman and Greek philosophy, and he says Jesus rises above all these ideas and declares the Son of God to be the visible manifestation. If you've seen God, you've seen me, Jesus said. Paul says here, you want to know what God looks like? It looks like Jesus. And some of you, that drives absolutely crazy. I love the Lion and the Lamb song, but the truth is this: in the book of Revelation, the text actually says, I heard what I thought was a lion. And then I looked, and I was shocked, because all I could could see it was a lamb that was slain. And the power of God comes in the simplicity of compassion and brokenness and forgiveness and love. Jesus, the reconciliation of all things initiated on the cross of Christ, has cosmic implications. The peace Jesus will touch, or the peace he brings will touch, it'll settle, it'll heal everything. A new heaven, a new earth, all things being made new. The cosmos has been disrupted since its orderly creation, and it needs to be reconciled with its creator. Powers, principalities, authorities, systems, structures, politics, religion, journey, faith, it all needs to be reconciled with Jesus. And it's reconciled through the pathway of peace, not dominance. Through peace, not the winning of an argument. Through peace, not through campaigns, through peace. To be reconciled. Peace. Some theologians say it's this thing, and it's kind of used in some of our modern music and articulation of the gospel. It's coming home. The lean of the good news, then, the gospel, is an encounter with the one who is at the center. The one who's redeeming, reconciling, drawing everything back home. The upward call in Christ, then, is to be reconciled. To encounter. And in the encounter, like many of you did in the midst of the musical worship today, you surrendered. Rather than that of classic understanding of evangelical conversion, it's more about transformation into the new life he brings. The old passes. You are becoming new. But it's not just about me. This is where we lost our way, in my opinion, post-World War II. We were so terrified by the specter of Hitler, we just we needed to get saved from evil. When the invitation always was to lean into Jesus, to die to self, to surrender and be transformed into a new creation. Not just manage sin so you don't end up in the Holocaust. It's a much grander story with a more gracious arc, a beautiful arc. It's way beyond my personal salvation. Everything's becoming new. He will establish justice. He will reign in peace. Surrender to the center of it all. Surrender to Jesus. Heed his invitation. Respond his call to follow, to become, to surrender, to get on board. This train is bound. So when was this written? 1872. The boot of slavery on their necks, the oppression of white supremacy suffocating them, But they knew there was a bigger story, that the kingdom was advancing, that Jesus was still at the center. These Negro spirituals became the seedbed of all modern forms of Western music: country, jazz, blues, rock and roll, rap, every form. So you can't hear, this is not a revival song. This is not a song to be sung in the revival meetings. It was a song of deep lament and yet incredible joy. Get on board. There's something bigger than you. And Jesus is at the center. It's what fueled Martin King and made him a different activist than those of the Black Panthers and Malcolm X. He leaned into peace. He leaned into even more suffering. He had a dream that all could walk together, that in this kingdom the oppressor is released as well as the oppressed. And if we just keep leaning into Jesus, even if we can't see it all, and we'll have a different perspective than you have, and we all see it a little bit differently, but we all lean into Jesus, we'll eventually get there together. Get on board. Get on board. Oh man, the richness of the theology and the life. They understand the biblical text so much better than we. We think our car doesn't start in the morning and God's abandoned us. And they found the deep songs and the deep sounds of celebration and lament and true worship in the midst of the darkest, most horrific oppression. Get on board. Get on board. Get on board. Get on board. He is before all things. And in him, all things hold together. He is before all things.